All right, welcome to lesson 2 for chapter 5. So we're going to talk about evolution and natural selection today. Learning goal is that you'll be able to describe the role of natural selection in the natural world. All right, so first we're going to talk about genes, populations, and species. So genes are distinct pieces of DNA that determine the characteristics an individual displays. And a population includes all organisms of the same kind found within a specific geographic region, typically of the same exact species. And a population contains more kinds of genes than any single individual within the population, just meaning there's more diversity in the whole population than if you just look at one individual within that population. There should be some diversity there. Even though all of these guys look exactly the same, there's going to be some variation in genes from this guy to that guy. All right, and then a species. A species is a population of all the organisms potentially capable of reproducing naturally among themselves and having offspring that also reproduce. All right, so in biology, you should have gone over like the species concept, being able to define a species. Is if that's something that doesn't quite click with you yet, please let me know so we can have that conversation. But the most basic definition we have is two things are the same species if they can naturally reproduce and their offspring also are able to reproduce. Okay, so natural selection. Natural selection is the process that determines which individuals within species will reproduce and pass their genes on to the next generation. So we talk about natural selection also in biology, but it's just nature selecting for which individuals have the stronger genes. And we talk about survival of the fittest, and in humans, when we talk about fit, we think about strength, and that's not always the case. Sometimes it's different coloring between these species might be more fit for a different area. And natural selection eventually can lead to evolution. So the changes seen in the genes and characteristics displayed by successive generations of a population of organisms over time is known as evolution. So as there's more pressure for one characteristic over another, that can go through the entire population, the entire species, and lead to evolution, either just a change in that species or even turning into a whole nother species, which would be speciation. So in order for natural selection to take place, there are several conditions and steps that are involved. It's not just a simple thing. It does not happen very quickly. So 1, individuals within a species show genetically determined variation. Every single person in this picture is the same species. They are all human beings, but they all look very different. Different skin color, hair color, height, all of the things. There is genetic variation there. Organisms within a species typically produce more offspring than are needed to replace the parents when they die. Most of the offspring die. So we don't see this quite as like human beings. We do, our population is growing. We do have slightly more babies than needed to replace us, but we aren't a good example of natural selection. But if we look at populations of animals in the wild, typically they are having significantly more babies than needed to replace parents because most of those offspring don't make it to reproduction. And then the excess number of individuals results in a shortage of specific resources. So because there's so many individuals, it puts a stress on the resources because there's only so many resources available. Now, because of that stress on resources and because of the individual variation, some individuals have a better chance of obtaining the needed resources and therefore have a greater likelihood of surviving and reproducing than others. So there's competition, and some individuals within that population are better fit and more prepared for that competition, or that competition because of the genetic variation that they have. And as time passes, the percentage of individuals showing favorable variations will increase, while the percentage showing unfavorable variations will decrease because those with favorable variations are better able to get whatever resources we are competing for. So the example over here is, this is a graph showing global increase in herbicide-resistant weeds. So as we spray herbicides all over the plants, at the beginning, it was killing all the weeds. But because of genetic variation and some of those weeds being resistant to those pesticides, they were actually able to reproduce because they were surviving, which meant their offspring were also resistant to the pesticides, and that population just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. So when we look at evolution, there's different patterns that we can see. The first is, okay, you were able to survive, and we could lead to speciation. So speciation is the production of a new species from previously existing species. And it's thought to occur as a result of a species dividing into two isolated subpopulations. Isolated meaning like they are not able to come together to reproduce, which would mean that their genetic variation is kind of like blending within the two populations, but they're completely isolated. And so they kind of veer off in their own direction even more. So these are all beetles, but they are all very, very different looking. And so speciation, they would not be able to naturally mate with, like, have offspring with each other, and it could be that it just doesn't work, that the timing is off, that the ritual is off, but they are different species. They are not having offspring. And if you were not able to survive and be fit for the new competition and whatever changes arose, that can lead to extinction, and that's the loss of an entire species. And sometimes we'll have speciation, and then that original species that this new species came from is no longer evolutionarily fit for the new world, the new change, whatever it is, and they go extinct. So of the estimated 500 million species believed to have ever existed on Earth, 98 to 99% have gone extinct. And not all of this is human cause. Extinction is a natural process, but some of it has been increased because of humans. There's also coevolution. So coevolution is the concept that two or more species can reciprocally influence the evolutionary direction of the other. If two species rely on each other. So here we have bison going with the grass. Bison need the grass to eat. The grass need the bison to help them reproduce and stomp down the grass so that they can grow more and all of the things. So they relied on each other, which means because they're interacting so directly, they actually evolve together. So in other words, organisms affect the evolution of other organisms. And since all organisms are influenced by other organisms, this is a common pattern. We all rely on other organisms to survive. And so a lot of organisms go on the evolutionary journey together. And then grazing animals and grass species are one example of coevolution, but there are many others. And that is the end of this lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next one.